welcome back. So we're going to talk about the last of the macronutrients. We're going to talk about protein and its role. Take her away.
Okay, yeah. So remember what I'm trying to do here is like literally give people the kind of the spellings, so to speak, before you go and write the essay. So the final thing is should be a more straightforward thing to explain, but it's another key one for that endurance athletes get wrong because today people think oh, protein, I don't want to get too big and blah blah blah. I don't want to get too muscly, but there's a lot more other things going on that a cyclist or a triathlete or any endurance athlete needs. Um, protein is are made from amino acids, and these amino acids are your building blocks for basically a lot of structures in the body, from obviously muscle, but just like your immune system, the cells that control your immunity, enzymes, hormones, how you govern your appetite is all manufactured from amino acids. The body of a cyclist wants to be, in an anabolic means growth. Okay, so um, I probably eat as much protein as a standard bodybuilder, but my sport is a breakdown sport. It's not a build sport. Running for, cycling and any long endurance stuff is a breakdown type process. So we want to be just counted. We want to be just balancing it out somehow and not breaking ourselves down too much. And that's what maintaining an adequate protein intake does. Finally, one of the things that controls, back to the central governor of insulin being the kind of messenger, you want the insulin to be controlled, and protein controls how it functions, okay? So here's a kind of a breakdown of how you should approach more protein. First of all, you want to be, let's call them complete foods that are complete with protein. Okay, what does that mean? Rice has a bit of protein in it, but not all the amino acids. Whereas a steak, it has all the amino acids that you want. Okay. The second thing is the bioavailability. That is how much of the protein that you eat from the food gets into your system. So people like chickpeas, and they're good, pretty much good protein content, but how quickly they get into your digestive, how quickly you absorb them is much slower compared to eggs, for example. Okay, so that's a real important one for people who don't eat, say, much animal foods or they're vegetarian. Really need to understand that your bioavailability. Okay. So, animal proteins are the most complete and the most bioavailable. So, your meats and your dairy, and then, of course, your fish are the best type protein sources to be eating. Obviously, eggs fall into that category as well. The lower, say, protein content availability type foods are, your beans, your peas, certain veg that people say, oh, this veg has a bit of protein in it, but how it's extracted essentially from the food is it's poor. It's poorly extracted. Okay. Um. So the first understanding that you need to have is that with your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner, you should have a complete serving, and I'll get into the serving in a minute, size of protein with each meal, and it's easy to get this wrong. Okay. The second thing you need to understand is that this is a term that's hopefully going to become more used as we go on, but it's just the nutrient density. Okay, how much good stuff is there in something? And people will say that a whole grain bread has got fiber, and it's good for you and has a bit of protein, but realistically its nutrient density is so very low compared to a piece of lamb, or a piece of lamb's liver, even better, or a few eggs. Okay, that means that in terms of what you're eating, the amount of food that you're eating, the the good stuff that's in that is way higher compared to eating the same amount of bread, or beans or pulses and stuff like that. Okay, so just you can look up a list of nutrient density foods, but just understand that generally the animal type foods are higher nutrient density compared to let's call it the vegetarian source. You would have to eat a lot of chickpeas, put it this way, to get the same protein and the same nutrient content of, say, a piece of steak, okay? So people are going to ask, so how much should I eat, you know? You can calculate it, like your 70 kilos or whatever, 80 kilos multiplied by 1.5 grams per kilo of your body weight gives you what your intake of a, let's say, a regularly training athlete should be. And that's 120 grams. And people are going, what's 120 grams in terms of food? And obviously for smaller people, or particularly smaller females, let's say they're 60 kilos or lighter, their intake goes down lower. That's just an example of the amounts. But let's just put that into food terms. So you're 80 kilos, you're aiming for 120 grams. You get up, you have 3 eggs in the morning. You go to, you go out for the day. You have a handful of nuts, a bit of yogurt. You have a bit of salmon fillet at lunchtime. You have a bit of cheese in the afternoon. You come home, you have a nice piece of steak. I mean, you're up there, okay? But if you compare that to getting up, having a bowl of Weetabix, having a scone and jam, and then having a slice of ham or a piece of bread and soup at lunchtime, and then you come home and you have a chicken curry or something like that, your protein intake is way lower than it should be, okay? And this is one of the big things that people get wrong. So I'm into eating foods that are, let's say, the protein content of food A is 30 grams, and the protein content of food B is 30 grams as well. But you need to understand which is more easily accessible. And I've shown you that, like, foods like eggs and steaks and meats and fishes are, the protein extraction that you can get from them is way better than, something like quinoa or lentils, okay? And you can, if you're into it, calculate what your protein intake is, and I just very quickly showed you there. Back to eating, like I said, this kind of switches from eating, people think eating chicken is grand, it's grand, but the good stuff that's in chicken is just plain protein versus a nice piece of venison, let's say a nice piece of lamb or a nice piece of beef. The nutrient content that's in the piece of lamb and the piece of beef is way higher than that's in the lean piece of chicken. There's not much in chicken other than protein. Okay?
Is there a bit of an overlap between high bioavailability proteins and nutrient-dense proteins?
Yeah, generally the stuff that's high bioavailability is generally more nutrient dense. So, your eggs has got more good stuff in it than your piece of bread. Like I said, your lamb's liver has way more good stuff in it than a piece of chicken does. So generally, people are kind of into it is like nutrient density and the bioavailability of the protein are the two things that you really should be looking at or considering. But this requires people to do a little bit more reading about the foods, but you can still almost do it on visual and on feel. It's a case of like I said, it's like if you're eating just a piece of plain chicken breast, or you're eating a nice piece of duck or lamb or beef or pork belly. I mean, there's way more good stuff in those type of foods than there is in the limp, I'll call it, piece of chicken. Okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of skimmed through stuff pretty fast there, but the protein understanding and the protein requirements are relatively straightforward in terms compared to, say, the whole fat and the whole carbohydrate understanding. But it's a key one that you can to get right, and it's actually a straightforward enough one. Once you know the basics, if you're getting up in the morning having a bowl of cereal and a sandwich at lunchtime, you're generally you're way off your protein intake. So you need to start correcting those areas, and it's straightforward enough to correct them. But this sets us up nicely now for summing it all up and putting it into practical examples.
Yeah, I think that's what everyone's been waiting for, Barry. So we're going to cut this recording here and we're going to jump right back in. We're going to show you how to put all this together. It's been great in the abstract learning about these concepts, but I'm really looking forward now to seeing the application of them. So I'll talk to you in a couple of minutes, Barry.
Okay, cheers.